Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Luffy got trained by Rayleigh, Shanks and Roger. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the Stelra Etnae for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. Let's start this video. The pub in Lowtown was filled to the brim with customers that night. It was to be expected, as many people, pirates in particular, had flocked to the usually sleepy town to witness the biggest event of the century, the public execution of Gold Roger, the Pirate King. Everyone was making a fair bit of noise, so no one paid much attention to the figure slumped at the bar, a bottle of liquor in his hand. Going to deliver Bink's ache following the sea breeze riding on the waves, the young man sang drunkenly and took another gulp from the bottle. Yet the usually upbeat song was utterly devoid of its customary cheer. He demanded for another bottle and then continued singing in that same depressing fashion between swigs. Waving our goodbyes, we'll never meet again. Shanks' voice cracked, but he covered it with another vicious drink from the bottle. Doesn't matter who you are, someday you'll just be bones. Never ending, ever wandering, our funny traveling tale. He snorted. Never ending, my foot. Stupid Marines. He muttered wrathfully. The redhead cast an angry look around the room at the carefree crowd. Stupid pirates. Disregarding that he was one himself. He took another gulp. Stupid captain. His fingers clenched painfully around the bottle. Stupid captain, idiot captain, shitty captain, just go to hell. Then again, he was probably already there. But that morbid thought, he drained the last bit of liquor from the bottle and slammed it down on the table. Barkeep. Another bottle. As the alcohol was dutifully placed in front of him, Shanks felt his anger seep away, leaving only numbing grief. With a groan, he buried his head in his arms, trying to keep the traitorous tears at bay. Sitting up again, he tipped back the new bottle, relishing the burn that went down his throat. The drop of moisture that rolled down his cheek was caused by the sting, he told himself fiercely. Yo-ha-ho-ho, 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 yo-ha-ho-ho. Hanks had always loved the sea. Every day, he would go to the beach and spend hours there. Often, he would leap into the water for a swim. Sometimes, he would just sit on a cliff overlooking the sea and stare out at the blue waves, looking out at the ships that went by, dreaming of sailing on that endless mass of blue. Even on rainy days, he could be found by the sea, watching the turbulent sea crash mercilessly against the rock of the cliff. It was just so beautiful. The salty smell of the sea would fill his senses, making him forget about the unpleasant odor of the alleys, the rotting smell that filled the area that he lived in. The sea allowed him to run away from reality. It was his constant companion in a world where he had no one. One day, he arrived at his usual spot to see a ship docked a distance away. That was strange, for the town's jetty was on the other side of the island. The ship wasn't particularly large, but something drew Shanks to it. He inched closer, fascinated at the commotion that could be faintly heard as the crew bustled around the deck. Boisterous laughter reached Shanks, along with traces of exuberant singing. A sudden gust of wind opened a flag to its full glory. A black flag, decorated boldly by a Jolly Roger. It was a pirate ship. Shanks loved the sea. Yet for once his attention wasn't completely caught by the sea, beautiful as it was. More than once, he found his gaze unconsciously straying towards the pirate ship. The pirates didn't notice the young boy who stared so hungrily out at the sea and equally longingly at the ship that he knew would be able to bring him closer to it. Even if they did, they paid no attention to him. Except for one. The black-haired man, his face half shielded from the afternoon sun by a straw hat, had turned in his direction. The rim of the hat was tilted up by one hand, and despite the distance, Shanks could have sworn that their eyes met. Startled at being discovered, the boy's eyes widened. Quickly he scrambled back into the cover of the forest, running back towards the town. Behind him, the waves crashed against the beach, and the salty tang of the sea breeze followed him for longer than it logically should. He could still smell the salt, as if the sea was calling him into her embrace. He wanted to throw himself into that salt-filled embrace. Shanks would always love the sea. For as long as he could remember, he had been invisible. Oh, not literally. But for all the notice the occupants of the town gave him, he may as well be completely unseen. To the villagers going about their daily business, he was just another one of those homeless kids who littered the streets. His red hair drew notice for its vibrant color, definitely, but even that was soon forgotten. No one knew his name, no one cared that he existed. Sometimes, in his more morbid moments, he wondered if he would die invisible as well. With practiced ease, Shanks sneaked into the bakery, hiding behind customers so that the baker wouldn't notice him. His mouth watered as he inhaled the smell of freshly baked bread. His gaze landed on a small loaf on one of the lower shelves, and he discreetly inched towards it. Just as his hand curled around the piece of bread, the baker noticed him. "Hey, you." He snatched up the loaf and made a dash for it. "Stop." The baker yelled, charging around the counter and heading towards him, his face full of anger. But Shanks moved much faster, already halfway out of the door by the time the baker started his chase. He had almost managed to disappear into the crowd when he crashed straight into a solid figure walking into the bakery. With a startled yelp, Shanks fell painfully to the floor when the figure, or was it a brick wall, didn't budge an inch. "I've got you now, dirty brat." Shanks flinched as the baker caught up and reached out a hand to hit him. He desperately scrambled to his feet, planning to make a run for it. "Wait a moment." A smooth voice interrupted and made the baker pause. Caught by surprise, Shanks also froze in his flight. Wide eyes watched as the black-haired man took out a coin bag from a large pocket. A light jingle of coins could be heard as the man extracted some coins and held them out to the baker. "This should be enough to cover the cost of the bread, right?" The baker was understandably confused. "Yes, sir. In fact, it's more than enough. But this urchin is surely below your know." The man cut over the baker's words as if he hadn't heard anything of the last sentence. "All right, then, I'm sure you have more important work to do than stand here talking, my good man. Off with you now." Amused, but sensing that he had been dismissed, the baker decided to let the issue go and went back to serving his other customers. The man squatted down in front of a still dazed Shanks, and the boy was greeted by a huge grin beneath a black mustache. The shade provided by a straw hat did nothing to stop the sun's rays from reflecting off those white teeth. "Hey, kid, do you love the sea?" Suddenly, he wasn't invisible anymore. "Roger." The man with blonde hair managed to say with thinly veiled annoyance after a brief moment of stunned silence. "What is the meaning of this?" By this, he meant Shanks. The boy resisted the urge to hide behind the black-haired captain, instead opting to solidly meet the gaze of the irate man. "Our new cabin boy. His name is Shanks. Isn't he cute?" Shanks could practically hear the grin in the captain's voice, even though he couldn't see the man's face from his angle. While he rather objected to being described as cute, he was a boy, after all. He decided to keep silent for now. The other man sighed and pinched his nose tiredly. "Nothing I say will change your mind, will it? Do what you like, then." Shanks could picture Roger's grin growing wider. "I'll leave him in your capable hands, then, Rayleigh." Silver's Rayleigh almost spluttered as his captain sauntered off without a care in the world. The nerve of the man. He sighed and massaged his temples before turning to face the newest addition to their crew. He let his irritated gaze sweep over the boy, noting the dirt and who knows what else that fairly caked the small frame. Rayleigh shrewdly noted the spirit in the little boy's eyes as he glared right back at him. There was potential there, probably what had prompted Roger to recruit the child. But that didn't mean that Rayleigh approved of the boy. Not by a long shot. There were some things to be remedied first, starting with the boy's appearance. Bath. Shanks' eyes widened in outrage. "I'm not taking a bath, shitty old man." Rayleigh raised an eyebrow at the language. The child's attitude towards his elders was another point that needed to be fixed. But that was for a later date. Bath, or off the ship. Shanks' mouth snapped shut. He huffily crossed his arms over his, looking sullen. "Make your choice, boy." Silence. Rayleigh raised an eyebrow at the boy. Shanks glared back. Without any warning, Rayleigh picked up the boy by the scruff of his shirt and tossed him overboard into the water. He leaned against railing to watch as the boy's head broke through the surface of the water. So the boy could swim. Good. It would have been such a hassle to have to go save him from drowning. "What the hell, old man?" the boy yelled, spitting out a mouthful of salt water. Rayleigh kept his face neutral. "You're the one who wanted to do it the hard way. If you want to come back on board, wash off all that dirt first." Shanks considered going against that order, but something told him that Rayleigh would show no hesitation in throwing him off the ship again if he just tried to get on again. With a grumble, Shanks waded to a shallower area and started to scrub viciously at his arms. When the dripping boy stomped on board again, Rayleigh noted with amusement that the boy's hair was actually a much brighter shade of red than he had previously thought. That just went to show how much dirt had been on the boy. He threw a large towel over the boy's head. Large childish eyes glared out at him from beneath the massive fabric, and Rayleigh suppressed a smirk. "Dry yourself properly, you can't go dripping all over the ship. I'll show you where you'll be sleeping tonight." Rayleigh started to walk towards the living quarters, but soon noted that the boy wasn't following him. Turning, he saw Shanks rooted the spot, still smothered by the large towel, looking as if he couldn't quite believe that he had been accepted and was now part of the crew. "Hey, kid." Startled out of his daze, Shanks quickly scrambled towards Rayleigh. Instead of walking away, Rayleigh waited until the boy had come closer to place a gentle hand on Shanks' head. The boy looked up at him in surprise. Rayleigh allowed a reassuring smile to surface as he ruffled that damp red hair. "Welcome to the crew, Shanks." The little boy huffed and crossed his arms in front of his, glaring at Rayleigh mutinously through shaggy strands of red hair. Silver's Rayleigh resisted the urge to childishly do the same. If you always treat people the way you do now, someone is going to snap and kill you one day. The glare intensified. Just let them try. I'll beat them up. Rayleigh sighed and counted slowly from 1 to 10, not wanting to blow up at the child. Violence is not the solution to everything. You nag like an old woman, idiot geezer. Shanks stuck his tongue out at Rayleigh. That did it. Screw his own advice. Rayleigh cracked his knuckles menacingly. Looks like words are useless. Come at me, I'll beat some manners into you, boy. The red-haired boy looked at him warily, conscious of the man's change in mood. But no one had ever faulted Shanks for lacking courage, so it was to be expected that he eventually decided to make the first move by rushing up to Rayleigh and aiming a sharp kick at his thigh. Rayleigh noted that the boy's kick was executed well and would have left a good bruise or more on a regular man, but a child was a child, and he was Silver's Rayleigh, first mate of the notorious Roger Pirates. The kid didn't stand a chance. He batted the boy away with hardly any effort at all, causing the boy to land with a painful thud on the wooden deck. To the boy's credit, he didn't make a sound even though it must have hurt, but instead immediately got up and charged at the older man again. A few minutes later, Rayleigh picked the now very scruffy-looking boy up by the back of his shirt. He noted the pain tears threatening to slip from the boy's eyes and the fierce scowl on the boy's face as he refused to let the droplets fall and suppressed a smirk. Roger had been right, as he always was when choosing new members of the crew. This boy had spirit and would doubtlessly become a fine pirate when he grew up. But before then, there was still a matter to be settled. So, am I clear? As long as you are on this ship, you are to treat me and everyone in the crew with proper respect. That includes listening to what I tell you to do without complaint. Understand? Yes, the answer was muttered with a great deal of wrath. What was that? Speak louder. I said yes, shitty old man. You deaf? Rayleigh raised an eyebrow. I mean, yes, Master Rayleigh, the boy said sullenly. I'm glad that we have an agreement. Rayleigh unceremoniously let the boy fall back onto the deck. Go back to your duties now. He couldn't help but grin at the resentful grumbles that followed as the young redhead. Now the next thing on his list would be to teach the child some proper swordplay. There was potential there, and Rayleigh was going to make sure that he reaches it. Shanks' smile was threatening to break his face into two. And he said that he'll become the strongest pirate in the world, Master Rayleigh. Isn't that just like the captain? Rayleigh smiled as the boy, he would always be a boy to Rayleigh, no matter how many years passed, excitedly prattled on. It seemed as if Shanks couldn't run out of stories about the little boy he had met in East Blue. Rayleigh rather looked forward to meeting the boy, though by the sounds of it, it wouldn't be for many more years. Still, listening to the redhead's tales brought back memories. It seemed like yesterday when he was still first mate of the Pirate King, sailing the seas on the Oro Jackson. But now the cheeky little cabin boy was a captain in his own right and already becoming an inspiration to the younger generation. Ben Beckman entered the bar, cutting off Shanks' recounting of Luffy's insanity and spunk. Captain, we're ready to set sail. Shanks nodded and rose. Got it. He turned to Rayleigh and gave a slight bow. I'll be going, then, Master Rayleigh. Bye Shacky. Thanks for everything. With a wave, he was gone. After the former apprentice had left, Rayleigh took a sip of his drink and chuckled softly. Shacky looked at him with a smile. Old memories. Rayleigh smirked. Just thinking about a little boy very much like the one in the story. They really do grow up so fast. Hey Shanks. Shanks tilted the straw hat back to see more clearly from where he was sprawled lazily on the deck and caught the envelope that Ben had tossed at him. He held it up curiously. What's this? Ben shrugged. It arrived with the newspaper through the post. Turning it over, he realized that a name was scrawled over the front of the envelope. The letter was addressed to red-haired Shanks. Shanks grinned in remembrance of his recently acquired bounty and epithet. It explained somewhat how the letter had found him, not completely, of course, he wouldn't presume to understand how the postal service worked, but there was still the question of what the letter was for. Extremely curious now, Shanks ripped open the envelope to reveal the prettily decorated card within. His eyes scanned over the cover and contents before he erupted with a laugh. Ha. He sat up and waved the card at his crew excitedly. Change course for East Blue, men. An old friend's getting married and we're invited. The wedding was a beautiful affair. Shanks was glad that they had arrived in time for the event. Between the time that it had taken for the invitation to reach the ship and the bad weather that they had encountered on the way, they had almost been late. Yet seeing the happy couple was well worth the trouble. As the ceremony ended and the crowd surged forward to congratulate the newlyweds, the red-hair pirates hung back. Ben glanced at Shanks with a serious expression. You realize what this probably means, don't you? Shanks sighed. It's regretful, but he has the right to make his own choices. We're in no place to say otherwise. Ben smiled approvingly and watched as Shanks squeezed through the press of people towards the couple. Yasopp. Shanks grinned widely and clasped the blond man's hand with a firm grasp. He began to pump it up and down enthusiastically. Congratulations. Yasopp's eyes widened. Shanks. You came. Of course. I wouldn't miss this for the world. You invited me, after all. Introduce me to your wife, will you? Yasopp grinned widely and drew his bride to his side. She was a pretty dark-haired woman with a sweet smile. However, under that gentle demeanor, Shanks could see the strength of spirit that shone in her eyes. Yasopp had chosen well. This is my wife, Banchina. Shanks bowed politely in greeting. Pleasure to meet you, ma'am. I'm Shanks. Banchina's eyes widened in recognition. Shanks wondered briefly if it bothered her that he was a pirate. Yet he saw that the emotions that passed through her face were not fear and disgust. Unexpected determination lit up her dark eyes as she met Shanks' gaze unflinchingly. The pirate was intrigued. 5 years, the lady said suddenly. Shanks blinked in confusion, uncomprehending. Come back in 5 years and he'll go with you. Banchina. Yasopp protested, rather panicked. Banchina was firm. It has been his dream since young to sail the seas. I don't want to be the one who ties him to land. You offered him a place in your crew a few years ago, didn't you? Does the offer still stand? If he wishes it. Give us 5 years together. After that, please take him with you. Shanks understood and respected her for her intentions. Then I give you my word that I would return in 5 years, ma'am. Banchina smiled and took Shanks' hands in both of hers. Thank you. Please call me Banchina. You're my husband's friend and therefore mine as well. Feel free to join in the festivities with your crew. Today, you are our guests. Shanks squeezed her hands lightly and let go. Thank you, Banchina. As he watched the couple move away to mingle with the guests, he grinned and started back towards his crew. That's an amazing woman you got there, Yasopp. You're lucky to have her. He tipped his straw hat lower over his eyes. I'll see you in 5 years, then. 4-year-old Yasopp burst into the house, shouting in excitement. Papa, Mama. Pirate ship. There's a pirate ship. Yasopp and Banchina looked at each other wordlessly. Yasopp opened his mouth to speak, but Banchina silenced him with a finger against his lips. He took her hand in his and held it tenderly. Tears shimmered in his eyes, mirrored in hers. Her free hand reached up to caress the side of his face. Oh. Chase your dreams. The day after their 5th wedding anniversary, Yasopp set sail. Turkey. Shanks sweat dropped at his captain's outburst. The Roger pirates were returning from a day out in Jaya so that their shipwright could do some adjustments to the ship. But then his gaze fell on the ship and he understood the reason behind the exclamation. It really did look like a turkey. Master Rayleigh, why does the ship have wings? It's so that we can reach our next destination, a sky island. Shanks' eyes widened. A sky island, so they really existed. A hand on his head made him turn up to look at his captain's enormous grin. We're going to fly, Shanks. Ruffling the boy's red hair affectionately, Roger strode forward to stand at the gangplank of the ship. Come, men. To the sky island. We'll sail all the seas, no matter where they are. The Roger pirates roared in approval. Aya. We're going to DEE. Buggy wailed as he clung to the ship's mast. In contrast to his panicking crewmate, Shanks excitedly ran to the railing and stared in fascination at the huge whirlpool their ship was being sucked into. On the raised platform, Captain Roger was laughing uproariously. The sky had turned pitch black and they were moving closer and closer to the center. Abruptly, the sea stopped moving. Eh? Buggy paused in his frantic screams. Are we saved? Everything is going exactly to plan. Shanks heard the navigator yell. Prepare yourselves. We're hitting the knock-up stream. Buggy gave a wail and clung tighter to the mast. Shanks grabbed hold of the railing as the ship shot upwards, propelled by an amazing jet of water. Stunned, he gaped as the ship began to sail vertically along the huge stream of seawater. Amazing, he breathed. Over the sound of rushing water and wind, he could faintly hear his captain's exhilarated laughter. He grinned. This was an adventure like no other. Shanks glanced at the figure plastered unmoving against the sturdy mast. The other boy had tears streaming down his face. You okay, Buggy? Shut up, you flashy bastard. Yup, he was fine. This is bad. We're leaving the stream. Quick, open up the sails. A yell came from the navigator and Shanks hurried to help the rest of the crew. We're flying. Someone cried out. The ship's flying in the sky. Shanks scrambled towards the railing to see the sight but almost slipped on the wet deck. A strong arm steadied him. Captain. Roger's grin behind his mustache was blinding. His voice rose above the roaring sound of water. We'll conquer the seas and the skies. Nothing can stand in our way. Isn't that right, men? The Roger pirates punched their fists into the air. Yes, Captain. Spurred on by the excited yell, the ship shot through the black cloud towards the sky island and new adventure. Nothing more than the faint creak of the door signaled that someone had entered the room. The footsteps were light, almost soundless. For all his size and advanced age, the other man could be downright stealthy when he wanted to, a skill honed through years of experience. That experience also allowed the newcomer to know perfectly well that Shanks was awake. But he didn't say a word, opting to merely settle into a chair by the bedside. Shanks didn't open his eyes. Even if he did, he probably wouldn't be able to see anything in the darkness of the room. But he knew exactly who had entered the room. He shouldn't be here. In normal circumstances, Shanks wouldn't be confined to the bed, under strict orders from the doctor to keep well away from strenuous activity. He shouldn't be here. The Marines would probably throw a fit if they knew that he was visiting a pirate. Sengoku would have apoplexy, no doubt about it. They shouldn't be here. It went against all reason that they would be in the same room in this manner, not fighting, not trading insults. Circumstances had brought them together, circumstances that involved one little boy with one huge dream. Silence reigned in the room. Neither man spoke, nor even made any more to acknowledge the other's presence. Yet there was a kind of wordless understanding of the reasons that had brought each of them to this room. The older man expelled a long sigh. It broke the silence, as did the words that he uttered next. "Thank you." Shanks didn't respond, still pretending to be asleep. Garp said no more, still pretending that he believed Shanks was asleep. Both did that because it was better that way. Because that was all that needed to be said. Shanks knew how much it was paining the Marine to have to thank a pirate. So he didn't say anything, didn't rub salt into the wound. Under different circumstances, he may have teased the Marine a bit, but not this time. This time, the gratitude was heartfelt, and Shanks would accept it as it was. Rising from his seat, Garp left the room as silently as he had entered. As he left, he passed Ben Beckman, who was leaning against the wall next to the door to his captain's room. In the semi-darkness, Garp gave him a curt nod, a symbol of the temporary truce that would prevent Garp from interfering in their departure from Fuchsia village. Because although Shanks was a pirate and Garp was a Marine, they shared a common love for a tiny boy with a huge dream. Because Shanks had protected Garp's precious grandson, and that was worth more than any form of justice. Because for all that light represented righteousness, sometimes one had to walk in the darkness to do the right thing. It was the apocalypse. On a ship, a crew of zombies emerged from below deck, their feet dragging leadily along the wooden floor. Their hair hung lank and damp over pallid faces and bloodshot eyes. Their leader was particularly grotesque, with blood-red hair that did nothing to hide the 3 terrible scars over one eye. An observant onlooker would be able to detect that one of the sleeves of his stained white shirt was empty, fluttering lifelessly in the wind. With a dreadful moan, the captain inched forward laboriously and promptly draped himself over the only human on the ship, who was standing at the center of the deck. The person's bravery was to be commended, for he made no move to escape from the clutches of that hellish creature. The zombie leader, dangerously close to the human's unprotected right arm, opened his mouth. "Then I need more sake." Shanks was completely ignored. Ben Beckman stoically continued to issue commands to the groaning crew. Then his captain whined. "Go take some hangover medicine." "I don't wanna." Shanks pouted like a child. "It's bitter." Ben shrugged. "Not my problem." "Meanie." "Thanks, don't wander off." His captain called as the boy lagged behind the group of pirates heading for town. "Okay." Shanks responded distractedly, his eyes drawn to the round fruit growing from a bush. The plant was fairly large, bare except for the single tomato half hidden by the massive leaves. Perhaps it wasn't exactly a tomato, for Shanks was quite sure that the bush was not a tomato plant. But either way, the fruit was large and red, and looked absolutely delicious. Without thinking further, he reached out a hand to pluck it. A loud yelp originating from the fruit made Shanks jump a foot in the air. While he gaped as the bush came alive, rustling menacingly. "Gah!" Shanks backed away hurriedly as 2 angry eyes appeared above the red fruit. Was the bush a monster plant that lured unsuspecting travelers near using its fruit and attacked them? What if it was carnivorous? Shanks opened his mouth to call for help, but his voice died in his throat when a figure burst out of the bush. "What was that for, you flashy bastard? I'll flashily kill you." Shanks stared at the blue-haired boy who had emerged from the bush in utter astonishment. Oh. So the eyes hadn't belonged to the bush, after all. "And you flashily talk, bastard." Relieved as he was that he wasn't about to be eaten by a carnivorous plant, there was still a matter that drew his attention more than the curses that the other boy was spewing. "Your nose is really red," Shanks commented bluntly. The other boy seemed to puff up with sheer indignation. "Who are you calling a big red round nose, you flashy bastard? And you have no right to comment, your flashy red hair looks flashily ridiculous." "Not as ridiculous as your nose." "Flashy red head. Tomato nose." The 2 boys glared daggers at each other. The loud laugh distracted them from their glaring match. "What do you have here?" "You found a friend, Shanks." Shanks turned, surprised. "Captain." Roger patted Shanks' head in passing, then bent down to look the other boy in the eye. Want to be a pirate, kid? What are you doing, Roger? An exasperated voice cut in from behind. Roger turned and grinned at his first mate. Recruiting a new cabin boy, Rayleigh. It would be nice for Shanks to have someone his age on the ship. Rayleigh just sighed. Grin still intact, Roger turned back to the stunned boy. So? Want to join my crew, kid? The confused expression shifted into one of outrage. Who are you flashily calling a pint-sized kid with a too large nose? Shanks kicked the other boy in the shin. Don't talk to the captain like that. Roger just laughed. This boy is interesting. Alright, you're now part of crew. What's your name? Buggy. The boy was obviously overwhelmed by the cheerful pirate captain. Let's go then, Buggy, Shanks. Rayleigh, if you just stand there and sigh, you're going to be left behind. As Buggy confusedly followed the crazy black-haired man, the grumbling blonde-haired man and the irritating red-haired boy, one thought floated to the forefront of his mind. What in the flashy world just happened? You'll get used to it after a while, Shanks said helpfully. Buggy glared at him. I haven't forgiven you yet, flashy bastard. Shanks just laughed and walked on. Buggy gaped at their retreating backs. They were crazy, all of them. And he was probably just as crazy for following them. Don't worry, Shanks, you look really cute. Shanks just glared at the snickering crewmate who had said that. The rest of the crew was similarly failing to hold back their mirth. The cabin boy folded his hands huffily over his dot, but that unfortunately only served to draw the crew's attention to the frilly top of the outfit he was wearing, which naturally sent them off into renewed peals of laughter. Alright, we're all set to go. Roger burst out of the captain's quarters. Dead silence followed his proclamation. The crew gaped at their captain disbelievingly. And then. Ahahahaha. Rayleigh doubled over, slapping his knee in his mirth. That sent the crew off again, the entire ship echoing with their laughter. Even Shanks, despite his annoyed mood, had to clap a hand over his mouth to stop a laugh from leaving his lips. Roger took this in good part for a while, but when the crew didn't seem to plan to stop laughter anytime soon, he raised his voice. Hey, have a little more respect for your captain here. The laughter obligingly died down, but the crew notably didn't look particularly contrite. Skipper Gaben wiped tears from his eyes. Sorry, Captain, but this is just too priceless. Roger rolled his eyes. Are you all going to stand there gawking all day? Go prepare the boat. As the men scrambled to work, Roger cast his gaze around. Not finding his target, he called out, Shanks. Here, Captain, the boy responded gloomily from behind him. Roger spun around and a huge grin split his face. Stars appeared in his eyes. So cute. He exclaimed, hugging the boy. Shanks squirmed uncomfortably in his captain's arms, unhappy at being called cute for the second time that morning. It was an adjective that he tended to avoid in normal circumstances. Several crew members hanging around nearby snickered. He glared at them over Roger's shoulder. The boat's ready, Captain. A crewmate yelled. Great. Let's go, Shanks. Roger let go of the boy and led the way to the side of the ship where the boat that would allow them to go to shore had been prepared. Here's the list of supplies needed, Captain, the cook handed Roger a piece of paper. The captain nodded and made to tuck it away safely in a pocket, only to find that his current outfit had no pockets. He nonchalantly dropped it into the square neckline of his top. To his delight it stayed within easy reach, kept up by the rolls of cloth stuffed down the front. Seeing this, Crocus snorted, and Roger looked back at him innocently, amidst muted laughter from the rest of the crew. Spin a bit, Captain. Someone called. Roger sportingly did a twirl which spread out the soft folds of his clothing. The crew cheered and clapped. Roger took a bow. Try to keep the captain away from trouble, Rayleigh reminded Shanks. Shanks sent him an incredulous look that read, is that even possible? To which the first mate sighed and amended his request to try to keep him away from too much trouble. Come on, Shanks. Roger called impatiently, eager to be off. The boy hurried to join his captain. Soon, the two were securely in the boat headed for the island. Shanks looked warily out at the unnaturally still sea as they rowed. An enormous sea king reared out without warning. Shanks gave a startled shout, but Roger was unfazed. The Sea King bared its teeth to attack the boat, but then suddenly froze. Shanks saw fear light up in the creature's eyes, and a moment later, it turned tail and fled. You alright there, Shanks? Roger asked cheerfully, as if they hadn't almost been attacked by a giant Sea King. I'm fine. He tilted his head back to look at Roger. When are you going to teach me that, Captain? Roger looked thoughtful. How about once we get back to Grand Line? Shanks smiled widely for the first time that day. Awesome. The boat finally reached the beach and came to a stop in the soft sand. Roger leapt out, pulling up the extra fabric of his outfit upwards to keep the hem from getting wet. Shanks clambered out after him. You ready? Roger asked with a grin. Shanks made a non-committal noise that Roger apparently took as an affirmative as the older man immediately set off further inland. Sailing an armed ship on the Combelt was dangerous. Taking a tiny rowboat to reach an island on the Combelt was borderline suicidal. But what they were doing was absolutely, completely, inarguably insane. Shanks tugged uncomfortably at the hem of his knee-length lace dress. Where in the world had the crew managed to get hold of one on such short notice anyway? Sighed and followed his captain into Amazon Lily. But then again, the Roger pirates had never been normal. Shanks stared out at the fog that shrouded the surrounding area. It was eerie, to say the least, not being able to see anything around them. Hey, Shanks tilted his head to one side. Do you hear something? Next to him, Buggy was shaking violently. Idiot. There's flashily nothing out there. Shanks ignored his fellow cabin boy, leaning slightly over the railing in an attempt to hear the noise he had detected clearer. His brow wrinkled in confusion. It sounds like singing. Going to deliver Bink's sake. Today and tomorrow, our dreams through the night. Waving our goodbyes, we'll never meet again. But don't look so down, for at night the moon will rise. The song sounded like it was coming from far away, almost undistinguishable over the swishing sound of the waves. Was another ship also sailing on these foggy waters? It was impossible to tell. Yet strangely, it sounded as if only one person was singing, rather than a whole crew. When the Roger pirate sang, everyone would cheerily join. So why was there only one voice singing? You don't think it could be a flashy G-ghost, could it? Shanks shrugged and grinned mischievously at his fellow cabin boy. Why not? He said teasingly. Buggy squeaked, cursed at him, and then ran for the safety of the living quarters below deck. Shanks continued to stare out at the fog for a while before leaving the railing as well. He was getting hungry, which meant it was nearing midday. It was hard to tell with the heavy fog enclosing the area. Going to deliver Bink's sake. Let's all sing it with the dawn. A song of the waves. Doesn't matter who you are, someday you'll just be bones. Never ending, ever wandering, our funny traveling tale. Heading for the galley, Shanks encountered their ship's resident doctor. He decided to voice out the question that had been nagging at him ever since Buggy had broached the subject. Say, Crocus-an, do ghosts exist? The doctor looked thoughtful. I have never seen a ghost before myself, but we've seen stranger things on the Grand Line, so I would say it is very possible. Why do you ask? Shanks glanced out at the fog. The singing couldn't be heard anymore. He shook his head. No particular reason. Just curious. Just out of range, also sailing on the foggy waters of the Florian Triangle, a walking skeleton sang Bink's sake all alone on a big, empty ship. Yo-ha-ho-ho, yo-ha-ho-ho. Yo-ha-ho-ho, yo-ha-ho-ho. Yo-ha-ho-ho, yo-ha-ho-ho. Yo-ha-ho-ho, yo-ha-ho-ho. Shanks stared around at the unnaturally empty deck of the Oro Jackson and wished that the music would start again. He wanted the loud, boisterous singing of the crew to tell him that the events of the past few days had been nothing more than a dream. He wanted his crewmates to laugh and tease him for having this nightmare. But that would never happen, because this wasn't a dream. The silence was not a dream. He could remember the days when the Roger pirates would simply spend the day singing and dancing, making merry in the middle of the vast sea. Bink's sake was a favorite, accompanied by copious amounts of rum. Just a few days ago, they had been doing just that until their captain suddenly made an announcement that changed their lives forever. The Roger pirates were going to disband at the next port. The Roger pirates, who had been through so much, were going to end on a nameless island in East Blue. Now the ship was too empty, too quiet. There had been much reluctance, of course, but slowly the crew of the Roger pirates began to disperse, stepping off the Oro Jackson with heavy hearts. Some lingered, like him, but they soon began to leave as well. He didn't want to leave. The sound of footsteps on wood made him turn, tears shimmering in his eyes. He didn't want to leave. Captain, his eyes pleaded with the older man. Let me go with you. Roger sighed. I can't, Shanks. You have to understand that. But. The captain cut off his protest with a hand on his straw-covered head. Do you know why I gave you this hat, Shanks? Shanks couldn't answer through the sobs that choked him. Roger smiled sadly and drew the teen into his arms. This straw hat holds a wish that you will grow up to be a man that I would be proud of. Chase your dreams, Shanks. Live. Live life as I cannot. Find your own crew and fill your ship with laughter and music. It won't be the same. No, it won't be the same. They will be different from us, and thus your experiences with them will be also different from what you have seen so far. That is how you will grow. Roger gave him a quick hug and then gently pushed him towards the gangplank. Go now. Swallowing another sob, Shanks tilted his straw hat lower to cover his eyes. He walked across the gangplank to the shore for the last time to join the remnants of the Roger pirates, waiting to send their captain off. Someone patted him comfortingly on the shoulder, but Shanks couldn't make out who it was through the blur of his tears. He hurriedly wiped the moisture away. Shanks turned to look as Rayleigh stepped onto the gangplank as well, the last member to leave the ship. The sound of Roger's voice reached the waiting Roger pirates, the words a murmur only heard by the first mate. Rayleigh's lips twisted into a smile that was both fond and pained as he continued down towards the shore. The gangplank was withdrawn from the shore. The lonely dark-haired figure stood looking down at them for a moment before turning away. The Oro Jackson had always been filled with laughter and music. But from then onwards, there was no sound. Shanks sighed and tipped his straw hat lower over his eyes to block out the sun. He was lying on a small boat, being lightly rocked by the waves. The single sail was unfurled, but was catching no wind. The boat simply stayed lazily in the middle of the sea with no island in sight. The boat's sole occupant briefly considered taking up the oars in light of the windless state, but soon dismissed it. It wasn't as if he had anywhere to go, anyway. He wasn't particularly worried about being attacked either. It was East Blue after all, a far cry from the dangers of Grand Line. For the past few weeks, he had been drifting with no destination in mind, going where the seas and wind chose to bring him, docking in random harbors just long enough to stock up supplies. No responsibilities, no chores, no cares. This was the life of freedom that he had wanted, wasn't it? Well, if this was freedom, he would rather not have it. It had been less than a month since the captain had officially disbanded the Roger Pirates and ordered every single one of them off the Oro Jackson, and Shanks was bored out of his mind. There was more than a mere twinge of loneliness as well, though he would never admit it out loud. He missed the captain, even though the older man had frequently landed them in the worst of scrapes. He missed Master Rayleigh, even though the latter was a demon when it came to training and was absolutely merciless towards Shanks' faults. Heck, he even missed Buggy, even though they could hardly spend a moment together without fighting. Life on the Oro Jackson had been full of its ups and downs, but it was infinitely more enjoyable than his current situation. The silence was driving him batshit crazy. He wished something would happen. Anything. As if in answer to his thoughts, a strong gust of wind swept his treasured straw hat right off his head. He bolted upright, ignoring how the boat swayed violently in response to his sudden movement. Ah. Hat. He made a frantic grab at the airborne hat of woven straw. When he managed to catch hold of the rim, he gave a sigh of relief, only to utter an utterly undignified screech as the boat decided that it had enough of his actions and tipped him over the side. Shanks spluttered, shaking his wet hair out of his eyes as he glared at the boat. The wooden thing bounced innocently on the waves nearby, looking as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened, except for the fact that it was now devoid of its passenger. Just when he thought that things couldn't get worse, the wind decided to start blowing again and cheerily moved the boat away from him. Shanks cursed and got a mouthful of salt water for his efforts. He replaced his hat on his head and prepared to swim. The sound of a boat cutting through the water made him glance behind him, and his gaze met the amused eyes of a black-haired man. "Need a hand there, kid?" Shanks couldn't understand why most of the people that he met seemed to like to call him a kid. He was 15 years old, for goodness sake. But considering that the man was several years older than him and had offered to help him, Shanks let it slide. He allowed the older man to haul him on board. The sails caught wind and shot forward, chasing after Shanks' runaway boat. Shanks wrung his shirt dry to the best of his ability over the side of the boat, then turned to the other man with a smile. "I'm Shanks, thanks for helping me." His new companion nodded in acknowledgement. "Ben Beckman." His captain's voice echoed in his mind. "Find your own crew, fill it with laughter and music. Live, as I cannot." Shanks grinned. He had never been one to let good chances pass him by. Fate had practically deposited a potential crew member in his lap. "Hey, Ben, be my nakama." He didn't want to be alone anymore. "For the last time, I'm not joining your crew. I'm not interested in becoming a pirate." "Oh, come on, we would make a great team, Ben." Ben sighed and strode forward, ignoring the red-haired team beside him. It seemed as if no words would penetrate that thick skull. "I give up." "So you'll join my crew?" "No." Shanks pouted. He followed his dark-haired companion into the town that they had docked at. The pair had noticed the island when they finally managed to catch up to Shanks' runaway boat, and Ben had announced the need to restock supplies. On the pretense of wanting to do the same, he actually still had a good amount of provisions on his boat. Shanks decreed that he would do the same. He wasn't about to let his new reluctant nakama out of his sight. Not until he had convinced him properly. Ben stopped at a fruit stall and considered purchasing some apples. They looked really good, bright red and fresh. The stall owner, a kindly elderly lady, smiled toothily at him. "It's 50 berries for 10 apples, dear." "I'll take." Suddenly, he felt Shanks tense at his side. He looked at the younger man in surprise, wondering what had caused such alarm. The blood had completely drained from his companion's face, the pale skin and red hair forming a shocking contrast. Glancing down the street, he didn't see anything that could elicit such a reaction. Except for a gray-haired man dressed in a floral print shirt and khaki shorts who was glaring at the boy. You. Shanks cringed and cursed under his breath. You're that red-haired brat of Roger's, aren't you? Garp raged. This means that Roger is in this area. Tell me where he is, boy. Captain isn't here. So Roger isn't here, Garp mused, and for a moment Shanks almost thought that he was off the hook. As if I would believe that. The Marine shouted angrily. Garp's gaze shifted to Ben. And you. You are in cohorts with him, aren't you? A new member of Roger's crew? Ben opened his mouth to deny it, but Garp didn't give him the chance. Stay right where you are, brats, and come quietly. No can do. Shanks replied, already running away. Taking a brief glance at the infuriated older man who was now rushing in their direction at full speed, Ben took off after Shanks. Who the hell is that? He asked, catching up with the redhead. Vice Admiral Garp of the Marines. The Vice Admiral? Why is he after you? Aren't you just a rookie pirate? I thought you don't even have a crew. Shanks sighed. Long story short, I used to be an apprentice on a rather notorious pirate crew. Garp is particularly obsessed with catching my captain. Where's Roger, you brat? Came the yell from behind them. I don't know. Shanks yelled back. Don't lie. The Marine roared. But it's the truth. I told you not to lie to me. Tell me where Roger is. Ben's eyebrows shot up. Roger. As in Gold Roger, the Pirate King. It's Goldie Roger, actually. But yeah, he was my captain. Ben noted the deliberate change to past tense, but didn't ask further, sensing that it was a sensitive topic with the youth. The child stumbled across his path, chasing after a ball. Ben's eyes widened, and he threw himself to the side to avoid crashing into the little boy. The sudden change in direction messed with his balance, and he almost ended up on the ground. Luckily he managed to right himself in time, but the distraction gave the Vice Admiral sufficient time to catch up to him. I've got you now. Garp cried out triumphantly, catching hold of Ben's arm in a vice-like grip. The boy's mother quickly snatched the crying child up and carried him indoors to safety. Shanks, not noticing Ben's almost fall, had gotten quite a distance ahead, but he skidded to a stop at the sound of Garp's words. He turned and gasped, seeing what had befallen his companion. Wait, it's me you want, Garp. He's not a Roger pirate. Let him go. Why should I do that? This has nothing to do with this. I seriously just met him this morning. He has no connection to the captain. You won't arrest an innocent man, would you? Innocent, huh? I have no reason to believe your words, brat. How about this, you bring me to where Roger is, and I'll let this person go. But I really don't know where the captain is. He wailed, frustrated by the old man's stubbornness. Too bad, the two of you will just have to come with me, then. But Ben in his grasp and Shanks unwilling to abandon him, they didn't stand a chance against Garp the Fist. Soon, the pair was tied up and thrown into a room in what was probably Garp's house, sporting throbbing bruises and bumps on their heads. The Marine pinned them with a stern stare and then left the room, presumably to make a call to headquarters. The door was shut behind him, and they heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. Ben sighed and leaned against the wall, conscious of the uncomfortably tight ropes chafing against his skin. If someone had told him yesterday that he would be caught by a Marine admiral, he would have laughed in that person's face. But then he found a red-haired boy in the middle of the sea, and his life got turned upside down. However, there was a question that nagged at him. Why did you come back? You could have easily gotten away back then. You're Nakama. The reply was so simple and spoken with such conviction that Ben was taken aback. He momentarily forgot to protest that he still hadn't agreed to join the Redhead's crew. But now you've been caught and will be handed over to the Marines. You could be hanged. Shanks' expression turned mischievous. Not if we are no longer here when Garp comes back. Ben stared on in surprise as Shanks deftly freed himself from his bonds. Shanks grinned in triumph. Ha, that's what happens when you underestimate me, Garp. I may have just been an apprentice, but I learned many things from the captain and Master Rayleigh. He started untying Ben's ropes. There. Now let's go. Shanks picked the lock and quietly pushed open the door. Seeing that the coast was clear, he beckoned to Ben to follow him. They dashed out of the house, almost running over a young girl with dark green hair who looked a few years younger than Shanks. She squeaked in surprise, dropping the ball she was playing with. Ah. Shanks' arms flailed, caught off guard by the unexpected obstacle to their escape. We're not going to hurt you. Please don't call Garp. Surprised, she tilted her head to one side and regarded him seriously. Are you pirates? Shanks motioned for Ben to head towards the dock first, and the older man complied. The teen turned back to the girl. Yeah. The girl's brow wrinkled. But Garp-san says that pirates are bad. We're not bad, I promise. We haven't done anything bad to you, right? The girl looked thoughtful. Garp-san. Shanks gulped and turned around to see a fuming Garp standing a short distance away. Stay away from Makino, you red-haired brat. Ah. Shanks sprinted away. I wasn't doing anything. Be quiet, you. They neared the port. Shanks let out a breath in relief when he spotted the two boats bobbing on the water and Ben having already untied the moors for one of the boats. However, he hadn't taken into consideration that the seaside would provide Garp with readily available ammunition. Things took a turn for the worst. The large rock flew towards him, thrown by the insanely strong Vice Admiral. Gritting his teeth, Shanks held his sword in both hands and cut the rock in half. But what he hadn't counted on was a second rock closely following the first. His eyes widened. He couldn't possibly raise his sword in time. The gunshot sounded and the rock shattered. Shanks gaped as small pieces of rock bounced harmlessly off him. What are you waiting for, get on. Ben's yell snapped him out of his shock. He quickly turned to jump onto the boat that held his companion. Ben immediately opened the sails and they were off, leaving the enraged Vice Admiral behind on the shore. Soon, the island couldn't be seen anymore. But the danger thus passed, Shanks looked at the rifle in Ben's hand in awe. Wow, you're really strong. That was an amazing shot. You're not bad yourself. You have some pretty good skills with that sword. I was taught by the best. Still have a long way to go, though. The redhead looked at him seriously. Hey, Ben, be my nakama, Shanks said for what seemed like the 100th time. This time, Ben didn't reject immediately. He looked thoughtful for a moment and then smirked. Why not? An enormous grin blossomed on Shanks' face. Welcome to the crew, Ben. Now let's go find more nakama. Ben shook his head in exasperation. He had a feeling that he wouldn't be getting any peace with this boy as captain. But then he grinned. Aye, captain. He won't be getting bored anytime soon, either. Shanks had been heading for the shipyard on an errand for his captain when he had run across a most peculiar individual with spiky blue hair, weird goggles and… Why are you only wearing your underwear? He asked flatly. The younger boy bristled. Why do you care? I can wear whatever I like. Weirdo, Shanks deadpanned. Why, you Frankie began a heated retort but the sound of a laugh nearby got the two boys' attention. Ma, you're really noisy, Frankie. Shut up, Buckerberg. Shanks grinned and raised a hand in greeting. Iceberg. How's the ship coming along? Iceberg continued walking toward Scrap Island as the red-haired boy fell into step beside him. He looked over at Shanks, strong pride in his face. Of course it's absolutely splendid. Tom is the best shipwright in the world. I'll be helping him where I can, so that will speed things up a bit. Hey, I'm helping too. Frankie interjected hotly, scrambling to catch up to the two older boys. The cabin boy turned to look at him skeptically. He looks unreliable, but he's Tom's apprentice as well, Iceberg cut in before a squabble could break out. Shanks uttered disbelievingly. You want to fight, bastard? Frankie yelled. And what did you mean by he looks unreliable, Buckerberg? Ha. You youngsters sure are energetic. Tom laughed as he lifted a huge plank of wood onto his shoulder with no appearance of strain. Hero, Yokozuna agreed cheerfully. Tom. Captain wants to know if the ship's done. Shanks called out. Tom laughed heartily again, this time having to stop to catch his breath. What an impatient captain. I tell him 5 days and forbid him to come to the site, and what does he do? Send his apprentice. Ha. He smiled at Shanks, wiping tears from his eyes. The ship will be done when it's done. You can't rush making a ship, especially one like this. It's a ship that will sail all around the world, fit for a pirate king. I'll do it with a dawn. Great. Shanks grinned widely. Hey Tom, can I watch you work? Ha. Why not? Don't get in the way, Baka. Frankie yelled from the side. Shanks stuck his tongue out at him. Shut up, underwear pervert. When Shanks returned to the inn the crew was staying at, Roger immediately pounced on him. Well? He asked, his eyes shining in anticipation. Tom gave me a message for you, Captain. Shanks paused. What is it? Roger prompted impatiently. Shanks grinned cheekily at the black-haired man as he quoted the old fishman's words. If you're a real man, you wait with the dawn. Hey, have you ever thought of becoming a pirate? Shanks asked Iceberg curiously the next day. Shanks had returned the next morning and offered to help out in the shipbuilding. Now he was hauling some of the smaller pieces of wood around, watching the way the older boy easily carried much larger planks with envy. Ma, never really thought of it. But I suppose I would rather build ships than sail in them. This is where I belong. Shanks made a slightly disbelieving noise in response, not understanding why someone would choose shipbuilding over sailing. But it was good, he supposed. If everyone wanted to sail, who would make new ships? Still, it wasn't a concept that he could quite understand. I wouldn't want to join some stupid pirate crew. Frankie replied with a derisive snort. No one asked you, pervert. I'm not talking to you either, Carrot Top. Mummy didn't teach you to put on pants, Frankie. Frankie tensed. Yeah, she didn't, the blue-haired boy ground out before stomping away angrily. Shanks watched him leave, confused. He had just been teasing, like they had been doing to each other the whole morning. Did I say something wrong? Iceberg sighed. Frankie was abandoned by his parents, who were pirates, mind, a few years ago. Tom found him and took him in. Shanks winced. Oops. He knew that Frankie wasn't Tom's real son, but never questioned the absence of the boy's parents. I should apologize, shouldn't I? Ma, it would be good if you did. A distance away, the younger boy was pounding nails into the wood as if they had personally offended him. Shanks approached cautiously. If it helps, I don't know who my parents are, even, Shanks ventured. Frankie's violent movement slowed slightly, but he didn't give any other indication of hearing Shanks' words. Nevertheless, Shanks was encouraged and continued. But I don't really mind much, you know why? Because I have the captain, Master Rayleigh and the crew now. It's kinda like what you have with Tom and the others. Frankie still gave no response, keeping his attention on his work. But didn't look as angry as he had been before. Shanks thought that it was the right time to offer his apology. Hey, Frankie, I'm sorry about what I said just now. I didn't really mean it. Frankie frowned at the nails for a moment longer before turning to glare at Shanks. Shanks willed himself not to flinch and to meet the boy's sharp gaze calmly. After a brief staring session, Frankie turned back to his work. He shrugged nonchalantly. Fine, I forgive you. Shanks' face finally cracked into a relieved smile. Truce? He asked cheerfully, holding out a hand. A moment's thought later, Frankie put his hand in his. Truce. Silence returned as the boy settled back into their respective tasks. But there was still something that nagged at Shanks' mind. So why do you only wear underwear? Shut up. Piro, the man cackled as he rushed towards Roger with his sword drawn. The captain was currently engaged in a sword fight with Shikey, which left his back wide open. As pirates, they weren't opposed to utilizing some shady tactics, unlike the ridiculous code of honor Roger's crew abided by. The metallic clash of another sword against his, however, made him stop in his tracks. I won't let you anywhere near the captain. His opponent shouted. Piro, Dr. Indigo laughed again, looking at the boy with amused eyes. You really think you can stop me, boy? He taunted, increasing the pressure on his sword. Shanks gritted his teeth in frustration and held firmer to his sword. With a swift movement, he whipped his second sword in a horizontal arc towards Dr. Indigo's head. Dr. Indigo cackled and pranced away. Shanks charged forward, both swords slashing at his opponent. Dr. Indigo deftly brought his sword up to block the attack. The indigo-haired scientist raised a hand to initiate his chemical juggling attack. But just as a bright green orb began to form, 3 knives held by a disembodied hand shot towards his head, causing him to have to dodge and break his concentration. He narrowed his eyes in irritation at the person who interrupted their battle. Buggy's hand reattached itself, and the blue-haired boy glared back, moving into a defensive stance. Shanks glanced between the two individuals. You two come from the same circus or something? He blurted out. Is that the way to talk to someone who just flashily saved your life, flashy bastard? Buggy shrieked angrily. Sorry. Shanks said with a sheepish expression, but his voice quivered from suppressed laughter. Thanks, Buggy. Piro, you must always keep your attention on your opponent, children. It's something that you must learn. Pity you aren't going to have any time to learn it. Dr. Indigo grinned ominously. Chemical juggling. Crap. Shanks cursed and managed to dodge the small green and purple orb by a hairsbreadth. It hit the deck and exploded, leaving a small hole in the wood. His eyes widened as the ensuing stream of explosive orbs shot straight at him, leaving him no time to avoid them. The hand roughly shoved him to the ground, and he heard the sound of a sword swishing at an amazing speed above his head, eradicating the chemical attacks. Master Rayleigh. Rayleigh smirked. Fighting children, Indigo. How dishonorable of you. Come, I'll be your opponent. Piro, I won't fool myself into believing that I can win against you, Dark King Rayleigh. But weaklings in your crew will be your downfall one day. Piro. Who are you calling weak, flashy bastard? Buggy fumed. Shanks also wanted to say that he wasn't weak, that he could handle this fight. But he knew that it wasn't true because he had lost and Rayleigh had needed to come save him. Rayleigh's voice cut through his unhappy thoughts. The man's tone was smug. We have no weakling in our crew, Indigo, only boys who are growing every day. They'll surpass you yet, so you're the one who should watch out. Piro, I look forward to it. What is so amusing, Dr. Indigo? One of the crew members asked curiously. Piro, was the only reply, the scientist not giving any answer to the question. After a while, the scientist got up and set the newspaper on the table before leaving the room. Curious, the crew member picked up the paper to look at the article the other had been reading. Red-haired Shanks labeled by Marines as one of the Yonko. What's so funny about that? Bemused, he replaced the paper on the table. The scientist was really hard to understand sometimes. Walking down the hallway, his shoes making farting noises with each step, Indigo continued to chuckle. There was blood. Bright red blood where he never thought he would see it. "Shanks," Roger said calmly, his eyes not leaving the shaking boy in the doorway. "Shanks," he repeated, moving slowly towards the boy, as if careful not to scare him away. "It's okay." No, it wasn't okay. Because Shanks had just seen blood on his captain's hand, staining his captain's lips. The blood had been quickly washed away, all evidence going down the drain. But not fast enough, because Shanks had seen it. This wasn't right, his captain was supposed to be invincible, the strongest man on the seas. There shouldn't be blood. Others, perhaps, but not his own. "Shanks," Roger called out again, worried. Shanks' eyes darted between his captain, the sink and the door. His head was spinning, he couldn't think straight. "Shanks," Roger said, this time firmer. Shanks briefly locked gazes with his captain, tore it away and ran, ignoring his captain's calls from behind him. Shanks walked slowly towards the captain's quarters. He wanted to apologize to his captain for running off earlier. And part of him wished that Roger would ease his worries, tell him that he hadn't seen what he thought he had seen. He wanted his captain to tell him that everything would be really alright. There had to be another explanation to it. There just had to be. As he neared the captain's quarters, he caught the sound of soft murmurs coming from within. Roger wasn't alone, it seemed. Curious, the boy pressed his ear against the wood of the door. He found out, Rayleigh, Roger's voice was dejected. "Shanks. I didn't want him to find out, especially not like this. He took it really badly." Roger's words were cut off by a bout of coughing. Shanks winced at the sound. "It's getting worse," Rayleigh said flatly, worry apparent in his voice. "We need to find a doctor." Shanks' breath hitched. If Master Rayleigh said that a doctor was needed, it meant that the captain's condition was serious. Roger sighed. "It's easier said than done. Not many doctors will be willing to set sail with pirates." "Where do you think such a person can be found, Roger?" Rayleigh laughed shortly, with forced humor. "Come, use your legendary intuition. Our next crew member." A pause as Roger thought, then the sound of someone getting up. "We head for Grand Line tomorrow." "Yes, Captain." Footsteps sounded, but before Shanks could hide himself, the door swung open. He froze guiltily. But Roger only said, "Come in, Shanks." He stepped into the room, and Roger drew him into his arms. "Hey," Roger said softly, one hand caressing the back of his head as the boy buried his face in the front of the captain's shirt. Shanks clung to the older man, desperately trying to wish away the memory of blood. He didn't want to remember the blood because it reminded him that his captain was only human. It reminded him that his captain wasn't invincible, wasn't immune to all forms of injury and sickness. It reminded him that his captain could die. "You Dr. Kariha?" Kariha turned towards the red-haired boy who had addressed her with a raised eyebrow. "So what if I am, boy? What, do you want to know the secret of my youth?" "Yes." Kariha was caught off guard. No one had said that before, let alone a youth who was barely a man. She looked at him sharply. "Why would a brat like you want to know that? How do you stop someone from dying?" "Who's dying, brat?" Shanks bit his lip and cast his gaze downwards. It's my captain." With a sudden motion, he grabbed hold of Kariha's sleeve. "Abe-san, you're a doctor, aren't you? Please help the captain." Kariha looked irritated. "Who are you calling Abe-san, you brat? I'm only 114 years old." "Captain, was it?" Kariha thought about the gossip that had been flying around village the whole day. Apparently a notorious pirate crew had arrived on their island and was making merry at the village inn. She remembered hearing the sound of singing when she passed by the brightly lit building. That didn't seem like the crew of a captain who was dying. Kariha glared at the boy who still had a death grip on her sleeve. "You a pirate, kid? Come in with the crew staying at the inn." The boy nodded. He looked a little hopeful, thinking that perhaps she was going to go to the inn to see his captain. Kariha scowled and removed her sleeve from the youth's hands. "Your captain seems perfectly fine to me," she snapped. "If calling me there is his idea of a joke, you can tell him that I'm not interested in playing games with him. Go away." She turned and entered her house, slamming the door in the boy's stunned face. Seriously. She should move her home to a more secluded place so that she wouldn't be pestered by pesky brats. Like on the top of one of the drum rockies. Yes, that would be a good location. The pounding on the door snapped her out of her musings on finding a new house. The voice calling for her told her that it was the boy. "Go away. I don't have time for your pranks. Please, Abe-san. Come with me to see the captain." Kariha frowned and sat down on her seat by the fire. The boy would tire eventually and go back to his crew. It was only a matter of time. Sure enough, the knocking soon after a while. Good riddance. Kariha sighed and massaged her temples. What an annoying brat he had been. After a short doze to recover from her tiring day, she got up to start cooking dinner. Crossing the room to her kitchen, she caught sight of something unusual from the corner of her eye. Shocked by the implications, she hurried to the window. No doubt, the flash of red she had seen was the boy's hair. She wrenched open the front door to see the boy from before huddled at her doorstep. So he hadn't left after all. Kariha felt a guilty feeling arise at the prospect that she had misjudged the boy's intentions. It was definitely more serious than she had initially thought. The hand felt the boy's face, and she cursed at the unnatural coldness. The boy looked up at her blearily, only half conscious. "Doctor." "Stupid boy." Kariha rushed into her house and grabbed a thick blanket off her bed which she quickly wrapped around the shivering boy. Then, with a strength one wouldn't expect of a woman her age and figure, she picked him up into her arms and ran towards the inn. Kariha violently kicked the inn door open. The room fell silent as the men turned to look at her in surprise. She ignored them. "Who's the captain here?" she yelled. The black-haired man with an equally black mustache rose. "I am," who his words cut off as he spotted the boy in her arms. "Shanks." Roger ran to the door and quickly took the unconscious boy from Kariha. "What happened?" Kariha ignored him. Her gaze swept sharply over the pirates in the room. "You." She beckoned imperiously at Rayleigh, who she deduced looked more responsible than the rest. "Take the boy." Rayleigh raised an eyebrow at her tone, but nevertheless carefully took Shanks away from Roger. Kariha wasn't done yet. "The kid needs to be warmed up properly. Wrap him up in blankets, but don't put him next to the fire. Give him a hot drink when he wakes." "Got that." Crocus calmly intervened. "I'm the crew's doctor, I know what has to be done." He quietly told Rayleigh to bring the boy into his room, nodding to Kariha with gratitude before following them. Kariha looked satisfied at his assured handling of the situation. At least the boy was in good hands. Now she had a different matter to look into. "You," she finally directed her narrowed eyes back at Roger. "Sit down." She turned and began unpacking her medical equipment as the captain meekly did as he was told. He may be the highest authority on his ship, but even captains knew to listen to doctor's orders. "That kid followed me back to my house, begging me to save his captain," Kariha said bluntly. "That's you, isn't it?" Roger was stunned. So that was where Shanks had been the whole afternoon. "Can't you talk?" Kariha snapped. "So, do you know what illness you have?" Roger's smile was bitter. "That boy should know better than to risk his health for mine. What I have is advanced lung cancer. I know that my illness can't be cured. It's too late for that." Kariha muttered. "Hand," she demanded, and Roger complied. She took his pulse. "What symptoms do you have?" she asked as she continued the checkup. "Occasionally coughing up blood is the most obvious. Shanks, the boy who went to get you, that is, saw that a while ago, and I think it really scared him. Sometimes I have difficulty breathing. Our ship's doctor has been monitoring my illness and trying to control the symptoms." "Well, it's good that you have a good understanding of your health," Kariha said, not mincing her words. "I'll share some remedies I know with your doctor." "I appreciate it, doctor." Kariha started packing her equipment. "By the way, I didn't catch your name, doctor." "Kariha." Kariha smirked at him. "What, are you mesmerized by my youthful looks?" "No," Roger replied bluntly, but with a grin. Kariha's eye twitched in annoyance. After a while, she burst out laughing. "Cheeky brat." She finished packing and prepared to check on the boy again before leaving. Roger called out after her. "I'm Goldie Roger. Remember my name, because within the short time that I have left to live, I'll be the man to become the Pirate King." Alone in the hallway, she smirked. "Pirate King Goldie Roger, huh? The will of D has always produced crazy people." Identifying the room that the boy had been taken to, Kariha stepped into the room. Checking over the boy's vitals, she noted approvingly what the crew's doctor had done to make the boy comfortable. Not that she would ever admit it aloud to the man sitting next to the bed, of course. After a quiet discussion with Crocus about the captain's condition, she turned to leave. The hand reached out to catch the bottom of her coat. "Dr. Cure Captain," the boy murmured, only half coherent. Kariha took the boy's hand off her coat and smoothed her free hand over his forehead with a gentleness the doctor rarely exhibited. Foolish boy. As she left the room, she passed Roger, who had come to see the boy as well. The pirate's gaze told her of his gratitude, and she nodded at him as she shifted to let him enter the room. She glanced back into the room to see the captain gently touch the boy's hair, the way a father would caress his beloved child. Even in his sleep, the red-haired boy smiled at the touch. Kariha quietly closed the door behind her and left, feeling that she had, after a long time, regained faith in humanity. Roger was noting a most peculiar new behavior in one of his crew members. The second youngest, to be exact. The redhead seemed particularly reclusive of late, secluding himself in his shared room with Buggy whenever not busy with chores. As the captain watched the boy hurrying below deck to the living quarters after helping Crocus tidy up the infirmary, he resolved to get to the bottom of this strange change in his cabin boy. Creeping stealthily to the men's quarters, he peeked into the boy's room. Roger didn't really know what he had been expecting, but it definitely wasn't to see Shanks folding a palm-sized piece of colored paper with a look of complete concentration on his face. The boy was staring intently at his work, his bottom lip gently caught in his teeth. It was to the point that he didn't even realize when Roger quietly pushed the door open and entered the room. "Shanks." The boy started violently, obviously having been so immersed in his task that he hadn't noticed the captain's entrance. "CC Captain." Roger sat down on the bed next to the boy, careful not to tip over the impressive stack of similar-sized paper. His new vantage point enabled him to look into the large box by Shanks' feet, noting that it held what seemed to be delicate bird-like forms made from the same colored paper. Upon closer inspection of the item in Shanks' hands, the paper appeared to have been miraculously in the process of turning into one of those birds. The boy's hands, however, had stilled with Roger's announcement of his presence. Shanks was looking at him with wide eyes, not knowing what to do now that he had been caught. So Roger started with a raised eyebrow. "What are you doing?" Roger noted with interest that the boy's face had flushed to match his hair, and Shanks' gaze dropped uncomfortably to the half-done paper bird in his hands. He fiddled with the edges nervously. Well, it's called origami." "Origami?" Roger echoed. The term was faintly familiar, and he had a nagging feeling that he had seen something similar to those paper birds before. "I learned it in Wano," Shanks applied helpfully, refreshing Roger's memory. Ah, so that's where he had seen those birds. They had just left Wano about a week ago. Come to think of it, that was about the time that Shanks' unusual behavior had started. "You like doing crafts like this?" Roger was curious. Shanks had never struck him as one for fine arts and handmade crafts. Somehow, Shanks' face reddened further, taking a hue quite similar to his hair. Roger was intrigued. So his reading of Shanks' character wasn't off, after all. There was a story behind this. And Roger was by nature a very curious man. "Mind telling me about this?" He waved at the paper birds and the unfolded stack of colored paper. Shanks fiddled with the bird unproductively for another moment, then sighed. The people of Wano have this belief, he finally relented, that these origami cranes have a special power. More specifically, the myth says that if a person can fold 1,000 origami cranes in a year, a wish will be granted. They call it Sembazuru. Shanks' hands resumed his action of folding the crane. The wish the people of Wano usually use these 1,000 origami cranes to wish for one of three things. Hands roughened by years out at sea were nevertheless nimble as they folded the paper, creating a bird out of the single sheet. Good luck, happiness, or Shanks' voice shook slightly. Or recovery from illness. There was no need to say who the wish was for, it was clear for both of them. "Captain, I'll finish the 1,000 origami cranes in 1 year, so don't leave, okay?" A tear dripped from the bowed head then fell onto the newly completed crane. With a sigh, Roger drew the boy into his arms. A gentle hand smoothed down the soft red strands. "Silly boy," he chided fondly as the boy cried into the front of his shirt. But he didn't make any promises. He couldn't. Not even with the power of 1,000 origami cranes. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow the Stelra Etnae for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.